In this video, I'm going to attempt to give a pretty comprehensive overview of charts. I reference charts quite a bit in my other tutorials and videos, and I just want to have a resource that I can point people back to. So I'm going to start with this raw data set here, and I'll just keep that as raw, and we'll start here. Now, the first thing I do before I even touch data is I format it as a table, and this is just a custom table that I have saved. And then I always go to view and get rid of grid lines because I hate them. Okay, so once I have this data set formatted as a table, first we're going to do here is create a basic column chart. If you select anywhere inside the data set, it will select everything in the data set and create the column chart for you. It's actually not what we want, but I'm going to go ahead and choose it initially here to show you how you can remove data or add data from this data set. So you'll see here this first series points to visits. And then if we select the orange bar here, that refers to revenue. And then you have the e-commerce conversion rate. So I actually want to remove the e-commerce conversion rate. So I'm going to do that by just moving this little handle here. And you see it takes it out of the chart. It used to be over here in the legend. Watch the legend. Now it removes it. So we're going to do that first off. And once you have exactly what you want in here, so we have visits and revenue broken down by the different marketing channels. Then what you want to do is just kind of clean up your data a little here. So I typically don't choose the standard colors, but you have options in here that you can choose from. I really don't like to keep them all the same color, but you can do whatever you want. Typically what I'll do is I'll select them individually and just change the colors through here. Say we choose this, and my branded colors are this burgundy and the light gray. So we'll just go with that. In this case, we really don't need the grid lines, so you could just select them and press delete if you want to get rid of them altogether. Or at minimum, I just pressed Control or Command Z. If you press Control or Command 1, that always pulls up the formatting options for whatever you have selected, whether it's in a table or a chart. And here we can change the grid line color. So if we make it a light gray, it actually makes it much more subtle. And you can also change the colors of the columns in here. So you can change the fill color. You could get crazy. You could put a pattern in there or a gradient. I wouldn't recommend it. But you can change the border and a shadow. I never use 3D. You can use it at your discretion. I don't recommend it. I think it distorts the data. So we'll just go through some of the options that you see here. One of the options here is switch row and column. You'll see what happens if I choose that. In this case, it's not recommended. That looks pretty crazy. So we'll switch that back. You can also choose this here to select the data. You can also select the data by just right-clicking inside the chart with the whole chart selected. Oops. And choose Select Data. That's what I typically do. First off, I never have the legend over to the right. I really don't like it. I will typically press Command or Control 1 and move it to the top. If there's a lot going on at the top of the chart, then I'll pop it to the bottom. And then I also typically bump this font size up a bit. I find the 9 point to be a little small. So another thing I'm going to do here is choose the y-axis, and I find this to be a little too cramped. So I will typically press Control or Command 1. I'm not going to keep saying that. I'm just going to say pull up the formatting options from this point forward. So we can go under Axis Options and adjust this major unit. So typically what I'll do is double it. If it's set to 20,000, I'll set it to 40,000. And it's up to you if you want the tick marks, the major tick marks. I typically don't like them. I think it just adds a lot of noise and isn't necessary, so I'll typically get rid of them. And also, while I'm in here, this is just a preference on my part, but I really don't like how you see number, 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 and then dash. So it has the 0 formatted as a dash. So what I'll do is, and I have a whole blog post on this, but this first format before the first semicolon is the formatting for a positive number. For the second semicolon is the formatting for a negative number. And then before the third semicolon is the formatting for 0. And so what I'll do is delete the 2 question marks and the dash and just put in a 0. And then just click add and you can see the 0. If you don't take out the 2 question marks, it won't be right aligned with the rest of the numbers. Okay, so it's already starting to look quite a bit cleaner, in my opinion. You can go in here and get rid of these tick marks as well. You really don't need them. I just try to keep my charts as simple and clean as possible. So this is pretty clean. Okay, so let's say that we want to add e-commerce conversion rate to our chart. There are a couple different ways we can do this. We can either grab this handle and drag it over, and you'll see it added to the chart. Another way is you can just select this column and just copy, select your chart, and paste it in. If you do that though, you're going to have to press escape and deselect that column to then format your data series. So now that we've done that and we get this nice blue box here, we can't select e-commerce conversion rate. We can't select that series because it's so small because it's a percentage. The way to get around that on the PC is to go to the Format tab under Chart Tools. It's also under the Layout tab, either one, and you can just choose the series here. Once you have it selected, then you can press Control or Command 1 to pull up the formatting options. And I said I wasn't going to say that again, but I did. Okay, so once we're in here, what we're going to need to do is pop this onto a secondary axis. It's going to get really ugly here for a second, but we'll clean it up. Okay, and let's close that. And then what we'll want to do is, while it's still selected, change the chart type. So we're going to change this to a line chart. And then we can select it again, press Control or Command 1. And let's change the line color. And we could make that, let's just make that dark green. Okay, so now we have a fully functional chart. There is one more thing that we'll want to do. In this case, I really don't see the need to have 2 decimal places for the percentages. So what we're going to do is just select this column, or we could select just the data. And let's just reduce this by 1. Whoops, actually, my bad. Just select the data, go to Home, and reduce that by 1. And then there's no sense having these tick marks since we don't have them over here. So I'm just going to pull up the formatting options and get rid of the tick marks. And now you have a pretty clean chart here. There is one more thing that you'll want to do, and that is under Layout, I always add a chart title. So we can add this above the chart. And just select it, or you could just select it here and enter it here. So we could say visits, revenue, and conversion rate for June 2013. Or whatever you want to put in there. There is one other thing that I want to do here. If I just have one axis, I typically don't use the axis titles. However, if I have two, I just like to make it as clear as possible. So we're going to go ahead and add axis titles. So first we're going to add the primary vertical axis title. And I will typically rotate it. Now, it does get tricky to select in there and double click to either select it all or click and drag. So I've actually more recently found it just easier to select the box and then go up to the formula bar. So we'll just call this visits. And I usually like to bump this up a little bit, a little easier on the eyes. Actually, I don't need to select that. And we'll go back to axis titles and we'll choose secondary vertical axis title, and we'll rotate that, and we'll put in here conversion rate, and we'll bump this up. And I'll rotate all text 90 degrees. There we go. That makes it a little clearer. All right, so now let's say that you want to, instead of a column chart, you want to use a bar chart. What we're going to do is select this. For the bar chart, we're going to get rid of the conversion rate. And then what we'll do here is we'll just choose under the design tab, change chart type. And this will, let's see, give you bars instead of columns. Now, there is one unusual thing about bars, and that is with the columns, whatever is your largest value, and I do typically order them in descending order. Unless it's time-based, then I have things ordered in ascending order based on time, of course. But if I don't have a time element in there, like days, weeks, months, years, then I will order them in descending order by whichever I want to really emphasize. But with the bar, and I can't really wrap my mind around this, but it's the opposite. The largest values are on the bottom. So with the bar chart, what I'll do is just switch the order so that I have the largest ones on top. And we can select this. Let's just go ahead and delete that. We don't need that. Now, I typically will use a bar over a column only if the labels are really long. So if I'm working with, let's say, URLs of landing pages or something like that, longer values, I'll use the bars because I have plenty of room here. Whereas if you use a column, you're going to force people to tilt their heads and try to interpret what the individual landing pages are, or pages, or whatever you have down there that's longer. The drawback to the bar chart is you can't do like a combination chart with like a percentage, like conversion rate or bounce rate or something like that. So that's the drawback there. Okay, then if you wanted to do a pie chart, you can only have one data series for a pie chart. So let's go ahead and select this. And let's drop one of these data series out of here. So we'll just use visits. And then again, we'll go to the design tab, change chart type. And then we'll just change this to a pie. And we'll just select this for now. But here we have the pie chart. Is definitely not my favorite. We'll go ahead and resort this again. One thing about the pie chart, one of the only things that I really like about the pie chart is, let's say you wanted something to stand out. Well, you could select one of the pie pieces and just pull it out a little bit and kind of make it stand out. Another thing that you can do here is add labels. So we can add data labels, and we have lots of options here. So I'll typically try to go inside ends. We can make this a little bigger. make it fit a little. And you can also increase or decrease the size, or you can change the color. So let's see what white looks like. That tends to look a little cleaner. You can also make it bold if you want to make it stand out. Or you could try seeing what they look like in the center. I find that a little harder to read, but it's just up to you. It's totally preference. You can also do outside ends. Obviously, we would need to change those back to black or gray or something. Or you can let Excel choose. So however you want to do that, we'll just switch it back to inside end. Now, there is one other thing that I wanted to show with the columns, which I forgot. So let's choose design, change chart type. It's hard for me to say. Go to column. No, actually, let's just keep one. So let's say that you don't want to have this axis here. Well, then what you could do is leave these data labels in here. Now, it is a little small, so what we can do is select the series. If you just select one of them, it will select the whole series. Press Control or Command 1, and decrease the gap width. And you'll see that what that does is it just makes the columns a little fatter. And by doing that, the numbers fit more comfortably. Now what we can do is we definitely don't need this, so we can get rid of this. We can choose the data labels, delete those, and obviously you don't need that because you only have one. And there you have a really clean chart. So that's another option if you just want to go totally Spartan. All right, enough about that. Let's move on to a line or an area chart. So I typically will use a line or an area chart to show time. So here what we'll do is just select anywhere inside our data. Go to the Insert tab and choose Line. And this is the line chart that we'll want. This makes them individual data series, which is exactly what we want. And this is not a good thing to see. Okay, we'll just give ourselves a little bit more room. First thing I'm going to do is pop that to the top. And bump up the size. I'm not going to bother changing the colors. However, you don't want to ever leave these data series the standard colors. It just makes your charts look very, very amateur. So here what we can do, we have lots of options. Typically with a line chart, I will leave some kind of grid lines, but I'll definitely tone them down. However, one thing to keep in mind is if you want to use one of these styles, you want to make sure you choose the style that you want first. So let's say we go with this before you start customizing. If you start customizing and then you go up here and choose one of these styles from the design tab, it's going to undo everything that you've done. So now let's make this. I typically like to choose a lighter gray. Don't need to go quite that light. We'll choose that one. That way it's there, but it's not terribly obtrusive. And I'm not going to change the 0 because I already showed you how to do that. And I'm not going to get rid of the tick marks because I already showed you how to do that. But one thing I will show you is for something like this, you could either use a line or you could change the chart type. And some people like to use the area chart. I'll tell you, I personally don't like it. The only area chart that I will ever use is the stacked area. The reason for that is you can see that if you just try to keep them individual, then some of the data points get completely obfuscated. One way to avoid that is to choose the one in front and choose solid, more colors, and dial up the transparency. So that way you can at least see the data behind it, but I really don't like that option. Okay, one last chart I'm going to demonstrate is a scatter chart. One time for a client, I wanted to see if there was any kind of correlation between the average position of their ads and the number of clicks that they got. So I pulled from the API the number of clicks and the average position for Google and also for MSN. So let's chart them out individually. So if you select anywhere inside the data and choose scatter chart, we'll just choose this. And we can make this a little bigger, and you can format the data just as you always would. And you don't need that. So here we can see that there's a slight positive correlation. In fact, if you select the data and right click, you can add a trend line. And you can see that this is moving slightly up and to the right. So there's a slight positive correlation. And if we chart out MSN, go to Insert, Scatter, you can see that there's actually a moderate negative correlation. So if it's moving down and to the right, there's a negative correlation. And if we right click, we can add a trend line. And you see this negative correlation. So the interesting thing about this was you would typically think that the higher an ad ranks, the more clicks it will receive. But with Google, it's actually the lower it ranked. As it got closer to 2, it actually received more clicks than a higher position. And with Bing, you saw more typically what you would expect. So that's just a broad brush overview of all the things that you can do with charts. There are, of course, many more options that we didn't touch on. You can check out these layout options. I also, at times, I really like to add text boxes. If you select the chart and then the text box, it will actually stay inside the chart so that if you move the chart, the text box stays in there. If you create the text box outside the chart and then paste it into the chart or just move it into the chart, then you have to manually move the text box as well. And I do use both text boxes and shapes quite a bit to point out data. And this should just give you a pretty good overview of all of the things that you can do with charts. So get out there and start charting your data.